They always tell you it is too hard and too complicated to run your own mail server. Well, that's a lie. Hi, this is Carsten with OpenTech, and while you're here, don't forget to like, to subscribe and to hit the notification bell, since it helps. And in this video, we are going to talk about how to set up your own mail server, how to secure it, and how to ultimately get rid of Microsoft's or Google's offerings. Let's get into it. So the first question obviously is, why the hell would you run your own mail server? There are several answers to that question, but it basically boils down to just a few. First of all, maximum control. Your mail server is your mail server. It is not a mail server owned by Google, Microsoft, or other big vendors in the market. So you control it, you know what is installed there, and they won't be able to insert any advertisement or do any scanning on your email. Second, email is actually a decentralized medium. So whenever you use things like Microsoft 365 or Google for Business or whatever those offerings might be called, you basically bet on them being able to keep their infrastructure up and running. And you know, they probably are able to do that, but in the end, those providers are targets. They are very, very interesting targets for those interested in getting a bit more of information and or just disrupt the internet. So when you bet on your mail servers being more secure and more resilient with Microsoft or Google or any other big vendor in the market, could be the wrong assumption. Third, no additional costs. Your server just costs you roughly $5 to $10 a month. And that is that. You have no limitations in the amount of users. You don't pay extra for any users, and you can add add-ons as you like it. But there are obviously challenges associated with that. First and foremost, you are responsible for everything. So you are responsible for setting up your mail server properly. You are responsible for configuring it properly. You are responsible for backup, and ultimately you are responsible for security. So it is up to you to decide whether an additional layer of freedom, an additional layer of control and lower costs would make up for being responsible for proper setup and configuration, backup and security. In my mind, that is not even a question, and that is why we now start setting up our mail server. Wait, stop. There are requirements you have to fulfill before being able to run your own mail server. First of all, you need to have a domain and you should be able to manage that domain. I personally added my domains to Cloudflare, and then I do all the management from the Cloudflare DNS dashboard. Second, you need to run your own mail server on a virtual machine or a VPS in the internet. It would not make sense to have it in your home lab. Reason for that is mail servers are to be expected to have static IP addresses. And then number 3, you should be able and you need to be able to manage the reverse DNS of that machine. Check with your hoster whether you are able to set and customize the reverse DNS entry. If you can do that, well, you are good to go. Number 4, you need to decide for a mail server. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of free and open source mail servers out there. So I go and install Mailcow, which is a simple to set up mail server. Actually, it is way more than a mail server because it gives you webmail, it gives you calendar and address book functionalities, and you can manage everything from a great web admin panel. So let's get into it. Okay, the first thing you want to do is to provision your VM or VPS. I recommend the following settings: 8 GB of RAM for a production ready mail server, 4 vCPUs for a production grade system, and at least 10 GB of storage per user, plus roughly 10 gigabytes for the system and the mail server itself. So you end up with a minimum of 20 gigabytes of storage. I'd rather go with 50, 60 or even 100 gigabytes. That is depending on your needs and depending on the number of users you want to run your mail server with. Having said that, you can actually go with pretty much every modern Linux distribution. I personally lean towards Debian because it is a very, very functional distribution. It's updated regularly and it's very, very stable. So my recommendation, 8 gigabytes of RAM, 4 vCPUs, minimum of say 40 gigabytes of SSD storage, Debian as operating system. You can set that up with your provider. I provision that on my own Proxmox environment. So what I do first is to set up the machine. I use a Debian image as already pointed out. I go with a storage of 100 gigabytes. Since I expect a lot of mails to have on that machine, I go with 4 cores, meaning 4 vCPUs, and I go with 8 gigabytes of RAM, but I enable ballooning, meaning the machine can scale down to 4 gigabytes if required. On the network side of things, I leave everything on its defaults, and then I just finish the setup and start the machine. The installation is absolutely straightforward. I just touch on a few important points here. So make sure that you have the proper selection of country, location, and keyboard and locales. So you feel comfortable with the system, and you need to give the system a proper host name. I go with mail.opentech.net. Then you need to give a secure root password and you need to create a user. My user is called OpenTech. I also give that user a secure password, and then the actual installation process can start. We will use the whole disk and we will basically just make sure that we have as much space as possible to our disposal. Then with a Debian distribution, you will want to add your proper package source. I go with a package source nearby in Germany, and then basically I just make sure that I don't install some sort of desktop environment. Instead, I install a SSH server, and that is that. Now the actual installation goes through, and once finished, our machine is set up and ready to be used. Before you can do anything else, just make sure that you secure your newly set up system. SSH into the machine by using the IP address that you have either selected or have been given, and then switch over to the super user account. And now we do an apt update and apt upgrade to make sure the system is on the latest patch levels. Now we will install the sudo tool. After we have done that, we add our user to the sudo group, and now we can log off the system. Next thing to do is to copy your SSH public key over to the machine. You have an SSH public key, don't you? If not, create one and then copy that one over. The command is ssh -copy-id, and then you can log into your machine without having to provide a password going forward. Now we want to make sure that we completely disable password-based authentication. So we open etc sshd_config and look for the password authentication entry, which we will set to no. Save the file and then restart the SSH service. Perfect. The next thing we want to do is to install fail2ban to make sure that brute force attacks to our system are at least way more challenging to the attacker. Now we will install UFW, a simple firewall. And with that firewall being installed, we first of all deny any incoming traffic. Then we allow outgoing traffic. And now we allow specific ports. You will find them in the description below. After we have done that, we enable the firewall, and now our system is set up and secured. So the first thing you now want to do is to make sure that the reverse DNS entry is set up properly. You do that not within your DNS provider's console, but instead you do that with your actual hoster. So open the hoster's dashboard and look for a reverse DNS entry and then add the DNS name of that machine, which is not yet set, you will do that later on, as a reverse DNS entry. In my case, it is mail.opentag.net. In your case, it will be your machine's DNS name. Save that and then you are good to go. Now, you are required to do some DNS setup. You need to have the IP address of your machine at hand, and then you can basically open the DNS dashboard of your provider. As I already pointed out, I go with Cloudflare. And the first thing you want to do is to add an A record. This A record basically needs to point to your IP address. Add it, make sure that with Cloudflare the proxy is not enabled, and hit save. Now we need to add a MX record. The MX record is required for Mailserver's mail exchange, MX, to be there. If you don't have an MX record, you won't be able to receive any mail. So we add a record of type MX. The name we use is just add, since it is available for the whole domain, and we then point that one to the machine we just installed and where the A record points to. So we go with mail.opentag.net. You obviously go with your mail server's name. We give that record a priority. The lower the priority, the more likely foreign servers are to talk to that machine, but you can add multiple MX entries with different priorities to have some sort of a fallback in case your machine is going down. We give it a priority of 10 and then we hit save, and now the basic DNS management is done. Now we can do the actual installation of the mail server, and that is quite simple. SSH into your machine, and the first thing you might want to do is to switch over to the superuser account again and install the curl tool. Now we will switch to the root directory and install Docker. The command is listed in the description below. After having installed Docker, we will enable the Docker daemon, and now we install Docker Compose. Now we install the Git tool, and after that one has finished, we switch into the opt directory, and here we clone the Mailcow Dockerized Git repository. We now switch over to the Mailcow Dockerized subfolder, and here we now run generate_config.sh. Here we enter the host name of your mail server, that is mail.opentag.net in my case, the time zone, and now some basic certificates are generated. Next, the magic starts. We type in docker-compose pull, and now all the required Docker images are downloaded to your machine. We just have to wait a few seconds, and now we can run docker compose up -d to actually start our mail server. That might take a few minutes, so enjoy your cup of tea. And now, in the end, you have a running mail server. If everything went well, you would just enter https:// and then the domain name of your mail server. In my case, it is mail.opentag.net, and you would now log in with your admin credentials. The initial credentials for Mailcow are username admin and password moohoo, MOOHOO. Enter them, and obviously you want to change that admin password as soon as possible. So head over to your admin account, hit edit, and then enter a new password and save it. Perfect. You have done and mastered that very important step. Now comes the fun part. We need to add a domain and we need to finish the DNS setup. There are many steps that we will have to master now, but bear with me, we go them one by one. The first thing we want to do is we want to head over to configuration mail setup and add our mail domain, which is opentag.net in my case. So I enter that one, and I now can give it a description. I can add tags, whatever to my liking, and I can now change the number of aliases, mailboxes, the default mailbox quota, meaning maximum size of mailboxes, and so on and so forth. Once I've done, I just hit add domain and restart SoGo. SoGo is the web front end for the users. Once we have done that, we can hit the DNS button, and now a number of DNS records are displayed. Allow me to tell you what the required DNS records are. First of all, we will need to add the auto-discover and auto-config DNS entries. Those are for the clients. Those clients will then be able to automatically retrieve the required information for accessing the mail server, apart from username and password. That is, I guess, quite obvious. So you don't have to enter them by hand. And then there is that 3 authentication and security entries we need to add: DKIM, SPF, and DMARC. So the DKIM entry stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail, and that is an authentication technique that is basically working on top of a digital signature, which is added to each mail our server sends out. The DKIM domain key entry is used by the recipient to make sure that the signature is valid and the email is in fact coming from where it says it comes from and has not been altered. The SPF entry is basically used to tell the receiving server, which origins it is allowed to accept, and how suspicious emails are to be handled. They can completely be dropped, they can put into some sort of soft failing mode where the server could add them to a junk folder or whatever, or they just could be accepted. And then there is the DMARC entry. The DMARC entry is used to add some sort of reporting functionalities. So you would basically give information about your domain and how to handle, then again, suspicious emails. Plus you would add some sort of a reporting email address, which can be used by the receiving email server to report back if it receives some sort of suspicious emails. Here in our DNS records view, we can see all the required DNS records. We discussed them already. So first thing we want to add is the auto discover entry, which is basically just pointing towards the mail server. So we head over to our DNS server, add a new record, select the type CNAME and give it a name auto discover. The target is our mail server, so it will read mail.opentag.net in my case. I don't use a proxy here, and then I hit save. The next thing I want to do is to add the auto-config DNS entry, which is again just a CNAME entry, so just some sort of an alias. I hit add record, select the type CNAME, the name is autoconfig, and the target is mail.opentag.net. I disable the proxy again and hit save. Now let's come to the more complex ones. Let's first of all add the DKIM domain key. So we copy the name of that entry and add the record. The type is txt. We now add the name and we then copy the value that is already visible in the DNS records page of the mail server. Copy it, hit save, and we are good to go here. The next entry we will want to add is the DMARC entry. We use the DMARC assistant here. That is a small handy website. We add our domain name and the aggregate data reporting address, and we say don't discard any emails that might be suspicious. We just copy the resulting entry and then add it as a new txt entry to our mail server. The name is _DMARC, and then we just add the value which we have just copied. And the last thing we want to do is to add the SPF record. So we use that SPF record syntax website and we go for the entry reading we gleich SPF1 AMX all. So we copy that one and add another txt entry. The name is @ and the value is what we just copied. We hit save, and now the domain settings are complete and we can now use our mail server. Awesome. The last step in the configuration is now to just add a mailbox and an alias. So to add a mailbox, we head over to the mailboxes section and hit add mailbox. We give it a username. It is info in my case, the domain is opentag.net. I can now add full name and tags to my liking. I can create or add a password, and then I hit add. Now, after that mailbox has been created, I head over to the aliases section, and here I hit add alias. The alias is DMARC opentag.net. I talked about that in a DNS section, and the go-to address is info@opentag.net. I hit add, and now we have our email setup completed. We can now log out and then actually start using our mail server. So what we want to do now is we want to log in our web front end, and I do that with the info email address. And once I have done that, I can now just utilize all of the capabilities of my mail server. Before we now go and send dozens or hundreds of emails, let's first of all make sure that our configuration is truly working. So we open now a website called mail-tester.com, and that website is awesome if you want to check your email configuration. So we copy the email address that is visible there and then use that email address to write a new email. So over in our mail server, we just add the copied email address as recipient. We give the email a subject and a body, and then we hit the send button. Now we can head over to the mail tester website, and here we can now wait for the outcome of the test. It should be minimum an 8, better 9 or 10, and we have received a 10 out of 10 score, which is great. You can now go a bit more into detail with the outcome here. So Spam Assassin likes our email, everything is set up properly, and every entry is explained properly. Our authentication is properly set up. Obviously, the message could be improved, so we would probably add some more information there, and we can basically ignore the list unsubscribe header, and we are currently not blacklisted. Awesome. And now let's just use our mail server. So what I do now is I now write an email which is sent towards a Gmail address. So I registered a Gmail account there, and I sent that email to opentag@gmail.com. Give it a subject and obviously give it a body, and then just send it. On the right side, you can now see that the email is being received pretty much instantly, and everything looks great here. We now reply. Hit send. And now we have to wait roughly 30 to 60 seconds. That is because Gmail delays the sending. Once the email is there, we can see everything worked as intended. Congratulations! You have now completed the setup of your own mail server. Okay, great. You have set up your mail server. You have done all the DNS configuration stuff. You have secured your machine. Everything now is nice and smooth and up and running. To keep it that way, just make sure that you regularly update your operating system, that you update the mail server. You get information about how to do that in the Mailcow documentation, which I have linked below. And you want to set up some sort of backup mechanism. If you have a VPS with a public provider, they probably back up the whole machine. If you have your own custom VM, as I do, better think of some sort of mechanism, since your emails are very valuable assets. Apart from that, just enjoy it. Add email accounts and aliases to your liking, add additional software to your liking. and just enjoy the independence from the big mail providers. Just to make sure that you do not get blacklisted, check the DMARC reportings and probably add an abuse email address as well. So you would basically get information about things going wrong with your email configuration. But my personal experience is that if you just do the basics, like doing backups and securing and updating your system, you should be good to go for quite a long time. So what do you think? Is running a mail server a good idea? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to hit the notification bell, since it helps. Thanks for watching, see you next time, and don't forget, let's make the world a better place now more than ever. Thanks for dropping by. See you later. Bye.